I'm Lauren Weymouth, spearheading Ripple's University Blockchain Research Initiative, the UBRI program that supports universities worldwide, accelerating understanding, adoption, and innovation with blockchain technology. On this podcast, all about blockchain, we look under the hood at what academic and industry partners are building across all different industries to give us a better understanding. The goal is to convey how blockchain is solving current challenges and making all different sectors more efficient. Today, we're going to focus on infrastructure of crypto custody. We're joined by Riad Wahby, co-founder and CEO of Cubist. He's also a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. Now, I know Riad. Riad was an early Ripple UBRI fellow at Stanford while doing his PhD. He spoke at our 2019 UBRI conference on privacy. So I've been following his career for some time now. Riad, great to see you again. Welcome to All About Blockchain.
Likewise, this is fantastic. And thank you so much for having me. It must be, as you said, 5 years ago, we were at Berkeley, and I think I was giving a talk about anonymous airdrops. And wow, yeah, very cool.
That's right. Okay, so just giving us a little background on yourself, you probably didn't start out thinking that you would develop secure key storage. When you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, geez. I went through a bunch of phases. I come from a family of doctors. And then actually, strangely, kind of ended up at cryptography pretty soon after that. So when I was in middle school, I was the weird kid who dragged around a copy of Bruce Schneier's Applied Cryptography, that really big red book, which somehow I managed to convince my dad to get me. He was like, is this really appropriate? Do you care about this stuff? I was like, yeah, it looks so cool. And so that's kind of what convinced me to think about computer science, all of this. So I was working on all kinds of weird stuff on the computer. The internet was new and things were cool. And cryptography was like, oh, this is a really cool thing. And then somehow I wandered away from that and ended up as an electrical engineer for a long time. For undergrad, I did sort of a combination of electrical engineering and computer science, but then ended up as a circuit designer. So I worked for about 10 years as an analog and mixed signal circuit designer, which has very little to do with cryptography, and then was strangely, again, one of these weird turns, convinced by a good friend of mine, Mike Wallfish, to quit my job and go to grad school, which worked out okay. It was pretty fun. It was sort of interesting, and I ended up back in cryptography, which is kind of where I started.
Well, I think it's interesting for our listeners to hear. I think what you've done is kind of a dream for a lot of grad students, where you're still straddling academia, but you've started and launched your own company. So you're in the industry as an entrepreneur and a really well-accomplished cryptographer at that. Now, when you were back with Dan Bonnet doing your computer science PhD, you were kind of involved in everything in Web3. How did you start to focus onto security?
The earliest stuff that I worked on that was even close to Web3 related was really around zero-knowledge proof systems. And actually, that's still mainly what I think about in my research life. Some of my PhD students now are thinking about ZK proofs, but also, more generally about computer security. We kind of worked on all these things, and little by little ended up sort of coming closer and closer to actual practice. Some of the earliest stuff, it was in theory, you could do this. And then actually the anonymous airdrop protocol actually deployed at least one protocol, used it to actually send airdrops to people. And so that was really cool, because it was oh, wow, we can actually get this out into the hands of people who will really use it. And then Dan and I ended up working together on a standard for a signature scheme, a digital signature scheme that's now used by Ethereum and the Ethereum beacon chain. Writing a standard was this very interesting thing. And so as I kind of did more and more of this practical stuff, where I was really interacting with developers day to day, I kind of got more and more convinced that actually there's a ton of work to do, kind of connecting even stuff that seems really boring, like key management, but doing it in a way that's really, really good. And by the way, I say boring, I mean that in a good way. I want to, this is you know what, you really just have to get this stuff right, and everyone needs to do it. So it's not there's only 3 companies that are working on the most cutting edge, whatever proof system or fully homomorphic encryption or something awesome like that, right? And that's super cool. But on the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, it's everyone has this problem. And when we go talk to customers, everyone is oh yeah, well, we have tons of keys, we need to manage them somehow. And so really, I was just drawn to that problem, where it's everyone's got this problem, we really want to solve it in a really clean way that actually really helps performance and helps security in the whole space.
Okay, and take us back a level. When we're talking about the limitations of current security mechanisms in crypto and fintech initiatives, what are the most pressing issues?
This is a great question. I actually teach one of the undergrad computer security classes at Carnegie Mellon, and we spend a good portion of the semester thinking about a unit called human factors. And it's like when you build a secure system, if there are only 3 people who are able to use it effectively, then you've failed, right? Because everyone else who tries to use it is using it wrong somehow, right? And so to me, this is actually one of the places where we still have a lot of work to do in the Web3 space. And part of that is just where we really are trying to appeal really, really broadly, right? It's not the same thing as, in traditional finance, there are a few companies and a few people inside those companies who really understand how pins are protected when you go to an ATM and like type in your pin. There's a really complex system that lets you type in your pin securely on an ATM and it gets checked by your bank. I don't need to understand that when I go to an ATM. There's a nice user interface. I type in my PIN. Life is okay. All right. We're trying to get to that point in Web3, but we're doing it in a much less well-organized way. And that's kind of by design, right? It's decentralized. Everyone can kind of join in, can build things. And so unfortunately, that means that we end up having a lot of sort of reinvention of the like human interface wheel. It sounds like, oh, is that even really a security thing? Yes, absolutely. Human interfaces for security are super important because like the most secure piece of software, again, if I can't use it correctly, doesn't help me, right? So that's one place where I see that we still have a ton of ground to cover. To spend 10 more seconds on it, I promise I won't belabor. I think one of the things that we need to do to get there is there's a little bit of like an attitude shift that we need in the whole industry. And by that, I mean this. Most of us who are currently in Web3, we discovered it or we, fell into it or somebody told us about it. And then we went out and like consumed every blog post and Discord channel we could. And sort of through, this trial and error and making a bunch of mistakes, we kind of got stuff figured out. And now it feels like, well, I fought for all this knowledge that I've got. And so everyone else should have to do that too. And it's like, well, like my dad is not going to, right? Like he doesn't want to read, Discord channels before he like sends money to somebody. He just wants it to work, right? And I think many people are in that boat. So if we can kind of get over that like hazing mentality a little bit, whether conscious or not, I think that'll help. As far as another kind of technical security mechanism goes, where I think there's a lot of room for improvement, if you think about it, everything in Web3, basically every action I take is mediated by something like a secret key, right? A signing key, right? If I want to send a transaction, I have to sign the transaction and then send it to the chain. Or if I'm trying to generate a new identity on a new chain, what do? Well, I derive a new key. And okay, so everything is about like these secret keys. They're kind of our interface to the whole world, right? I can't touch Web3 except through my keys, right? And so that's a really interesting point of leverage for trying to figure out, okay, well, what do I mean when I say that I'm interacting with Ethereum using this key, right? If I go to a gas station, I pull out my wallet, it's like, well, there I am. It's just me. My wallet's right here. I'm not really worried about, whether simultaneously my wallet is getting used, at another gas station 100 miles away. But the same is not true in Web3, right? Because, somebody could just like maybe break into my computer, steal my key, and then off they go, right? Okay, so having the ability to specify in a really sort of fine-grained way, this is what my key is allowed to do. This is what my key, should do, and anything else is considered out of bounds. And the key should basically just refuse to do the wrong thing, whatever that means. I think that would end up being a really important and really crucial safeguard for every interaction. If I know that this is a key that I use for a trading strategy that I'm executing, and that trading strategy has these parameters, then any signature that somebody requests from that key that doesn't match, at least roughly match that trading strategy, should just be like, well, no, because I know that key should never be used for this thing. So like, don't pay the bad guy because like that's not part of my trading strategy, right? So I think really getting into this mentality that it's not just a key, it's a key and it's a set of capabilities that the key has, and anything else just the key doesn't do that. I think once we get to that point, then we really have a super powerful way. And by the way, also a super intuitive way of protecting ourselves from things like key theft and fund theft.
Absolutely. I mean, that's actually a new thought for me. The ability to be able to put parameters around your keys as a secondary safeguard. So if I only like to trade a certain type of day, a certain digital asset on a certain exchange, and it's happening somewhere else, that it's going to stop and check in with me. You send me some kind of text or email or ask for some kind of authentication because it knows maybe this is out of my bounds. That would be awesome. Going back to what you were saying earlier about increasing widespread adoption or removing barriers to people getting involved in this, like your dad, or, my sister recently has been actively asking me questions about crypto and wanting to learn more. Part of the thing that we're up against is that there is major concern still with crypto fraud. And it's an unfortunate byproduct of cryptocurrency gaining more worldwide traction. I think we're all looking for there to be more safety measures to reduce our vulnerabilities. Explain to us how you see cryptography addressing these shortcomings and what advancements are most promising in the near future.
Yeah, so I think a couple things here. Let's think about it from like a Web2 perspective. 10 years ago, nobody's really thinking, maybe 15 years ago, nobody's really thinking about cryptocurrencies, but people are doing tons of transactions online, right? I mean, first of all, people definitely do get scammed in Web2 every day, right? Like we shouldn't just say this is a Web3, but it's certainly a problem for everyone. I think the prevalent thought on this is that, Web3 is kind of rife with scams, whereas Web2, there's kind of some safety bounds. We kind of know, if I go to Amazon and I buy something, I mean, unless I manage to buy something counterfeit, like probably I'm getting something that's what I ordered, right? Why is that? Well, in Web 2, we have kind of this actually quite curated set of people who tell us stuff is safe, right? And we don't think about it because it's all kind of under the covers, right? It's, my browser knows that there are certificates that are signed by certain certificate authorities, and those people are considered trustworthy. And those are the ones who say, yes, you're actually talking to Amazon. And so kind of all of that happens really smoothly. But at the bottom, that's basically a reputation system, right? In Web3, we don't have that same kind of centralized authority, and that's good. It's also bad, right? And this is one way in which it's bad. Like there isn't just that sort of easy, like off you go. This is probably Amazon. So I think that one of the things that we're going to start to see is some more of that kind of reputation-based system, but in ways that are kind of more compatible with the decentralized ethos of Web3, right? A lot of folks in the last couple of years, when I've gone to conferences, some of my students have been super interested in things like, federated identity or, self-sovereign identity, things like anonymous credentials. And one of the reasons for that is this actually gives us kind of a glimmer of hope. It really in two directions. In one direction, it's like I'm preserving my anonymity, and we can come back to that. But in the other direction, having this kind of more robust credential system kind of in place, not in a way that kind of forces me like you must trust Google, but you can have a reasonable set of people that you trust, and like over time you're allowed to expand them on your own and stuff like this. But having kind of that safety net there in a way that's just kind of easy for everyone to use, I think that's really the way that we start to see a lot more trust and a lot less of the, well, is this thing a scam? How do we get there? Well, I think there are on the technology side still a few questions to answer, especially because right now we seem to have a little bit of the question of like, who do I trust and how do I sort of gain that trust is a little bit bound up in the complementary question, like how do I prove my identity to other people? And those two things really are closely related, so it makes sense. I think that maybe there's a little bit more focus on the second one, especially around preserving anonymity. And so maybe this is a little bit of another kind of mental shift required in the industry. But then I think the other thing that we really need to do is actually get more and more kind of big protocols to participate in this sort of thing, right? If I go to Coinbase, like I can click on some stuff and they will basically present me with a set of tokens that they've curated as like more or less trustworthy to first order, right? But if I'm trying to do the same thing in, an ecosystem that's really all about sort of, meme coins and stuff like this, there's not that same thing because it's a different ethos. This is a sort of a freewheeling, everyone gets to kind of play ethos. And so trying to marry those two things, right? Trying to have kind of a broader reputation system, a way for me to gain confidence that like, okay, here are these people, they're pretty well known. They say that these two things are good, but this other thing is bad. Like having that kind of thing at my fingertips where I don't have to go dig through Discord channels to figure out where something is, whether something is a scam or not, is to me really huge. And then the other thing I think that we're of course going to have to see is, and I think we will, and maybe this sounds like a bad thing, I don't think it is at all, is just an improvement in the way that law enforcement deals with these scams. Like today, I think a lot of times you get scammed and then like it's done. And maybe the scammer gets caught. But I think a lot of people have a notion that the scammers just don't get caught all that frequently. So like in some sense, the playing field is set up for the scammers, right? They get to do it and then they kind of get away with it. I think really just changing the game theory a little bit there, making it less likely that they succeed on the one hand, and also more likely that they get caught when they try on the other. You can sort of start to see almost like a phase change in the industry where those scammers just sort of recognize this is just not as profitable anymore. It's too risky. I'm just not going to do it.
I mean, we could spend an entire another show on desired legal protections in the industry, but I want to kind of dive deeper into the importance of cross-industry partnerships and creating a safer Web3 space. Can you share a success story where collaboration between protocols has significantly enhanced security in the crypto space?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Cubist sort of helped to launch what we call the Secure Staking Alliance. This was a little over a year ago. And that was really focused on how do we sort of put together best practices for people who are running, validators and other staking related infrastructure, sort of the basic stuff that's running everything, right? The perspective, or at least my perspective from a couple years ago or more, was that there was a lot of, maybe you could call it folklore knowledge in the industry. There were people who were like, yeah, this is basically the right way to, for example, run a whole big bunch of Ethereum validators, right? Like if I'm running a farm of Ethereum validators, I've probably over time kind of worked out like this is the way that, how to make operations smooth. This is the way that I'm going to keep my keys secure. This is the way that I'm going to prevent slashing and this sort of thing, right? Partially because of the decentralized ethos, I think we had a lot of reinvention of the wheel in things like that, right? And so as the older players sort of have that knowledge and newer players don't, it just sort of makes it difficult for people to enter and to play in the market, right? So our thought here was, look, we want to just like kind of level the playing field a little bit, kind of have a set of standards or at least a set of descriptions of these are the kinds of things that you're going to need to worry about. Here's a problem that you probably wouldn't anticipate up front, but you will have to deal with at some point, right? We saw a lot of interest and a lot of participation across the industry. There were folks who were doing things like providing insurance. There were folks who were actually running validators, folks who were running liquid staking protocols. All of these folks super interested in kind of getting together some kind of community knowledge that would help everyone to advance the state of play. Right. And I think we're also seeing that more recently in things like the Babylon ecosystem, in the Eigenlayer ecosystem, in these places where, you have this extra complexity on top of stuff that's already been there. Right. And now that we've added this layer of complexity, well, we also add, a whole bunch of new knowledge that people need. And so by sharing that knowledge and by sort of making sure that, we have people at least hitting some minimum standard for, say, securing their keys, this does a few things. Number one, actually like just reduces the amount of threat in the industry, right? But the second thing it does is it really gives people who aren't sort of deeply in the weeds on the technical details, it gives them a relatively easy heuristic for should I trust this or not, right? Because if somebody says, look, I'm following all of these procedures that, were developed in coordination with the rest of the industry, and you can see the document here, and yes, I'm doing these things, I don't have to go in and look in detail at like, was this the right decision? Was this the right decision? I just sort of have a high level notion that, okay, they're basically doing the right stuff. They're trying to follow industry standards. And that gives me a little bit more comfort. I mean, this is kind of related to the reputation thing, but maybe we can think about it more generally as almost this information infrastructure that you need kind of on top of the technical infrastructure, right? We need a way for people to discover who's behaving in a way that's sort of conducive to security and who's behaving in a way that's not. And one way to discover that, of course, is to get your funds stolen. But we'd rather discover it before that happens, right? And so we'd rather make it really, really easy for people to say, these folks, probably they're doing the right thing. These folks, maybe they have some practices that are a little questionable. And so I can make a decision before I risk my funds, who to go after or who to invest with or whatever.
Yeah, well, big kudos for being a part of creating the Secure Staking Alliance. Having been at Ripple for almost 7 years, we're also in this spirit that Web3 benefits from stronger cross-industry collaborations in the space, the feeling that rising all tides lifts all boats.
Absolutely.
And brings down those barriers to new players coming in the space, just as you said. Have you had any challenges with building these partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, folks think to themselves, should we be spending time on this? Everyone's kind of busy all the time. Like, is this the right way to, allocate time? Number two, is this helping my competitors? I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Like, does this help them? Sure. It also helps you, and it helps to kind of build trust in the system. And exactly as you said, the rising tide is the effect that we want here. We want all the boats to be lifted. I think these are the kinds of questions where we tend to see things. And then, of course, the people who have more seniority and more experience, I think, again, it's justifiable, but the first response might be, well, look, I have kind of all this hard-won secret sauce. Maybe I'll just keep it for myself, right? And my protocol will just be more secure, more efficient than yours. Again, it's kind of a totally justifiable thing. Like, this is hard-won knowledge. From my perspective, the thing that's been most successful in kind of convincing people to move away from those objections is to point out that, exactly as you said, this isn't a zero-sum game. This is something where, as we make the whole industry better, more people come into the industry, and there's just more available for everyone. So I think growing the pie is really the most convincing counter-argument that I can give. And in general, I think people have been convinced.
Yeah, inspiring. Okay, zooming into your baby, Cubist. Who are your co-founders, and when did you launch?
We've had a system out in production for nearly 2 years. And we actually started the company 2.5 years ago, a little more than 2.5 years ago. My co-founders, our chief operating officer is Anne Stefan. She's got a ton of experience in fintech. She was in operations in fintech for about 10 years, including doing a bunch of work in a high-risk vertical, preventing fraud and doing kind of compliance work. So that's super, super helpful, right? Because we have this perspective on, exactly. We have the operations perspective on security, which is, up until I, spoke extensively with Anne about it, like, I hadn't really thought about it, but that's kind of this huge other hammer that we have, which is fantastic.
She's your business person.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. She's our business savior. My two other co-founders are Dejan Stefan, who is a professor at UC San Diego. He's sort of programming languages and security. He helps run the security group there. He's done a ton of work on all kinds of really interesting, both attack work and defense work. So yeah, really, really like core security dude, great person. And Fraser Brown, she's a professor at CMU. She works on program correctness, bug finding, verification. So very much security aligned, but much more on the kind of, let's prove that this program has the correct properties. Let's detect bugs in operating systems and browsers and stuff like this automatically so that we can, find them before the bad guys do. So really, really super different perspectives from mine on computer security. And I think together, it's been a really interesting thing to kind of build a system with somebody who thinks about, how do we build this from the ground up to make it correct? How do we build this in a way that lets us take advantage of programming language features? Essentially, all of our code is in Rust, so we can take advantage of like really nice programming language features to sort of statically guarantee certain security things. And then, of course, I get to think about cryptography, which is what I like to do. And so it's really fun.
I'm looking at you, so I could see the passion in your eyes and the energy that you're putting towards this. For you, what was the light bulb moment when you actually realized, wow, I'm going to make a company out of this idea?
It wasn't quite such a straight line as that. So we actually...
It never is.
No, yeah, of course, right? Someday I'll revise the story and it'll be like, and there it was. I had the idea in my hands. But until then, no, the really true version of it is we really started out thinking about Web3 security, but actually a slightly different question in Web3 security, much more on basically how do you build distributed applications in a way that even if your application is running across multiple chains, you can still sort of ensure properties statically and ensure the security of the app and all of this. And by the way, I still think that's a fantastic question. And I think it's a really, really, of course, really, really hard thing to do. Like many of the hacks that we see are on bridges and other kind of cross-chain communication links, right? So we started, kind of working on that in earnest. And as we did, one of the things we realized was, well, look, if you're going to do real software development, trying to get all these kind of super great static guarantees, one of the things we're going to need is like a really great kind of testing story. And so that was actually where the CubeSigner idea really, really came from, was like, well, we're going to need a bunch of automation around like all the key management stuff that we have to do in order for like the rest of our system to work. And so then we went and talked to a bunch of customers. This is actually the closest thing to a light bulb moment, was after talking with dozens of customers. And by the way, that was because Anne told us, look, you guys have to just talk to customers. You can't sit in the basement writing code all the time, which it turns out is true. Well, no, I like to, but it doesn't help, I think.
You're growing.
Yeah. So basically we would talk to customers and they would frequently say, yeah, That's a super interesting problem. And definitely I can see that we will have that in a few years. But you mentioned this like automatic key management stuff. And that sounds really interesting because that's a problem we have right now. And basically we just heard that story over and over again. It was like, well, when we were 2 developers, we just had some ledgers and that kind of worked. And now we're 12 developers and we're on 14 different chains and the product turns into something, right? And so that was the moment really when we realized, look, this is actually something that's completely missing, is this ability in a really secure, totally programmatic way, do things like generate all my keys, generate signatures in an automated way, set policies, this thing I was talking about earlier, where you basically say this key basically has these powers and no others, really being able to do that in a fine-grained way that is really responsive to automation. And that really was the closest thing to a light bulb moment for us. Since then, other people have had a similar light bulb moment, but that's great. That's sort of confirmation. Like I think nowadays we're seeing a lot more interest in this highly automated stuff. And I think if you look at the corresponding technology in Web 2, you'll see things like HashiCorp Vault and a lot of these technologies that are, I mean, roughly analogous and clearly like core to the way that a lot of businesses in Web 2 operate. In Web 3, it's even more that, right? Because in Web 2, generally speaking, your finance team doesn't have to use your cryptographic keys. But in Web 3, if I'm like a fully on-chain business, my finance team, my ops team, like all those folks, their interface to the world is also cryptographic keys. And by the way, they're probably not developers, which means, you really need to give them the right kind of security, the right kind of, policy enforcement, the ability to have, multiple sign-offs, whatever it is. To us, this is like a really, really cool area to be in. Number one, because it kind of, touches all of my co-founders' interests, whether it's, sort of fraud prevention from Anne or, using programming languages or verification or cryptography, whatever it is, right? So it touches all of that, which is great. That's the bonus. The actual part that's really important, I'd say, is this is a problem that is sort of pervasive in Web3.
Yeah, I mean, the need for security at all levels is profound. So you're playing at the right game. Can you share with us some of your customers or clients that you're building security for?
We've been working a lot recently in the Babylon ecosystem. So we work a lot with Lombard. They're, I think, currently the biggest sort of Babylon-related Bitcoin LSTs. That's a really, really cool protocol. And we've had a lot of fun working with those folks. They're super sharp and they've got a really awesome stuff going on there. Our technology actually powers the Avalanche core wallet, which is the first party wallet in the Avalanche ecosystem. And this is, basically what enables folks to do things like, hey, just sign in with your Google account. Now you've got a wallet. If you need it on another device, great, just sign in there, off you go, right? And so actually, I'll just pause there and point out those are super different use cases, right? But both of them really fundamentally need really great key management. We're working with folks like Consensus. We're working with, actually, our very, very first customer was Anchor. We're working with them on an Ethereum LST that they've had running in production for a long time. We've got a bunch of other Ethereum LSTs that we work with. So yeah, we're kind of across the spectrum here. I'm certainly forgetting a whole bunch because I haven't listed the majority of our customers. I'd say we're kind of doing a bunch of really interesting work, both in the like full automation side of things and in the kind of very user-facing things like end user wallets. And fundamentally, the technology that's supporting these is all based on having secure hardware to store the keys, making sure that you can apply policies, having a really great set of authentication mechanisms, and kind of backup security and all of this. So it's pretty fun.
I love hearing about the variety of projects you get to work on, like the vast ways you're helping out these protocols and big names, like really impressive clients that we all have heard of. That's very cool. How would you say that your custodial key storage and secure hardware addresses the limitations differently than existing solutions? Or how do you differentiate from competitors that are rising up in the space?
That's a great question. We're never the custodian. So that already differentiates us from a bunch of people, right? So we're providing infrastructure that's very much like what a custodian would use, which I think is super interesting for many customers who aren't ready to have a whole team developing their key management infrastructure. I would say our biggest differentiators are effectively, look, we are fundamentally building on top of secure hardware. So we are using hardware security modules, secure enclaves, kind of the same stuff that's used in Web 2. Like if you look at the way that e-commerce is secured today, there's like $33 trillion worth of e-commerce, and basically all of it comes back to the security of these hardware security modules that are powering things like certificate trees, right? So fundamentally, we look at that as the best technology to use for key management. And best, another word for that is the most boring. Like we're not interested in doing like the most exciting, most advanced cryptography because and by the way, I am personally excited about using the most advanced cryptography because I'm a cryptographer. But when I look at a problem like this, I think the right tool for the right job. And to us, that's secure hardware. So that's one really, really big way in which we differentiate on a technological side. Now, from the perspective of the user who's actually touching the thing, compared to our competitors, the response times are about 100 times faster. Operating cost is way cheaper. And we're able to handle a much, much larger volume of signatures and volume of keys than the competitors because, as I said, we're kind of using the right tool for the right job. Another thing that I think we tend to see as a really big positive, at least for some customers, is that we have a couple different ways that we can interact with the customer. Like one is if a company comes to us and says, look, we need a service that'll just handle all this stuff for us, give us an API. That's good. That's easy. We're able to do that in a way that ensures that, either they're the custodian if it's their keys, or they're not the custodian, their end users are if it's something like a wallet. On the other hand, we have some customers who come to us and say, well, we really need a solution that can be installed into our infrastructure and can run there. And that's also something that we can handle. So we have customers who are basically, run their own sort of pocket universe version of CubeSigner, where, they have full control over everything. And, for sophisticated customers, can be a really important requirement. So I'd say the kind of flexibility in not only the deployment model, but also the custodial model is really, really, really important to customers. So overall, I'd say, look, security, performance, flexibility, these are the places where we differentiate.
Winning features. I'm sure Anne is proud of you for saying all these things. That you've really thought very well through how to distinguish yourselves from competitors. Oh, quick question. How did you come up with the name Cubist?
If you ask all four of us, you'll get probably four different answers. Although I think it'll be like a recognizable. Maybe there's a Kurosawa film that's relevant here. We were sitting around one day. We were thinking like, oh, maybe it's like we're kind of re-envisioning the way that we're kind of taking it apart, putting it back together again. What do we? That's like kind of like cubism, right? Like it's sort of anyway. So we're art nerds, and then this kind of stuck out to us as like related to the cubist movement in the sense that we're kind of reimagining the way that you look at the world through keys, I guess.
Now, you're 2.5 years in. This is just the business development person in me. I mean, you're still really busy creating all the mechanisms and safety protocols and building your client list. But is there an exit strategy in mind?
In one word, no. We're really focused on building the best product we can. I think that this is something that's in such high demand that we have essentially infinite opportunity to worry about every detail, every technical detail, every business detail of this thing. And so I think for that reason, more than any other, we're really still focused on those things. But I think if you zoom out and look broadly at the way that like the Web3 market is going generally, like there's a huge opportunity in the next few years for kind of everyone in Web3, right? What everyone seems to think is that we're potentially entering a friendlier regulatory environment. That gives more certainty. That makes it more likely that we'll see a lot of participation. From our perspective, what that means is there's going to be a lot more of the kind of mature interest, whether that's sort of enterprise or sort of larger companies that are getting into the space. I think this is one reason to think that like there's actually a ton of growth potential still hanging around. So I think we're more focused on that at this point than on how do we get out of here?
No, well, understandable. I mean, I can hear in your voice that you are still in the early days, very excited about what you're building and not thinking about the end or enterprise adoption, or something like that. For the listener who is not a crypto native, like your Dr. Dad or my pharmaceutical sister, who are just starting to dabble with digital assets, what are some steps they can take in the Web3 space to protect themselves?
Yeah, this is a really good one. So I think go slowly is a really simple way to put it. I think one of the things that folks tend to see when they get into Web3, like initially, is there's just this huge amount, like just an overwhelming amount of information. There's so many different things that you can do that all fall under the Web3 umbrella, right? I think many times, it's like, well, let's skip the shallow and let's jump right into the deep. It's like, well, okay, that can be okay, and you can kind of get out the other side. And look, many of us who are in Web3 now did exactly that, right? Maybe the sharks are bigger than they used to be, so it makes sense to really think carefully about, like, let's sort of get the concepts down first. Let's do the boring things for a while, and then maybe get into sort of more advanced things. So, okay, what does that mean? More concretely, it means maybe stick to a few really well-known chains, dApps, whatever it is. Just kind of, get used to the concepts, maybe really figure out how you're interacting with the Web3 space. And then, get into the crazy stuff, right? Sort of tucked in as an addendum there is, by the way, like, many, all of the same kinds of attacks that you tend to see by email, whether it's phishing or spam or whatever, you're going to get here too. So be on the alert for it. So that's one class of maybe warning is go slow. There, you got plenty of time. A second one is, I'd say, and primarily this is because I'm, thinking about keys and wallets all the time, is think really carefully about, what you're going to do for a wallet solution. I think the tendency is like, oh, that's the boring part. I don't care about that. But this is, this is your interface, and this is really the fundamental portion of your security, right? If I'm trying to do tiny transactions, it's okay, fine. If I'm getting $5 or $10 in, no problem. But the thing that you tend to see is, 2 weeks ago I had $5 or $10, and now I have 500 or $1,000, and maybe a few weeks from now it'll be 5,000 or whatever. Okay, now we at some point you need a shift, right? Because if you're still using, whatever kind of rando wallet that you just downloaded, who knows whether that's going to remain secure, whether it's getting updates, whether it's just been sold to somebody who's going to turn it into a scam, whatever it is, right? At some point it makes sense to think carefully about what is the, wallet software that I'm using. Is this software trustworthy? And it's unfortunate, I think, partially that we're in the situation where, kind of each individual has to think, like, what's my software supply chain look like? But that's where we are. And so using products that are built carefully and maintained by, trustworthy folks, I think is kind of crucial, because if you don't have that, you don't have anything. We power a bunch of wallets. I would always recommend those. The one that jumps out, which I already mentioned, is the Avacore wallet. It's a nice user experience. If you use the sign in with Google or one of these options, you're powered by CubeSigner, so your keys are basically stored in a remote private HSM and that lives in the cloud. You can use it from a bunch of different devices, and you get really, really strong security. So I'd say that to me is like, if you don't have good wallet security, you kind of don't have anything. So that's a really crucial one. The third thing here is, and this is not a maybe computer security thing. It's just like, kind of think through, if somebody is promising you a lot, like, Web3 isn't magic. If something seems too good to be true, it definitely is. That's still true in Web3, even though maybe we'd all like it not to be. So just, come armed with ample common sense.
I say the same thing to students in blockchain clubs who I'm talking to. If there's no such thing as a sweepstakes or a giveaway where you have to pay them first, that makes absolutely no sense. Stay away from that. Or if you're getting emails or texts from unsolicited people that seem to know you, or there's spelling or grammar errors, like, stay away from that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for, the listener who's like an exec at a more traditional company or organization who's looking to use blockchain maybe, or dabble in digital assets for their company, what are some things that they can think about or do in adopting systems to ensure safe interaction?
When we speak with bigger companies, you could kind of divide into two worlds. The really good world is when I talk to somebody who's like, all right, we're thinking about building in Web3, and here's the reason. This and this and this is going to be more efficient. We're going to be able to do it this way. We're going to be able to reduce this cost, or improve this efficiency, or whatever it is, because we're switching to kind of a fundamentally better technology. When I hear a story like that, I love it, because the person kind of knows why they're doing it, and they have some expectation, they have some bar that they're going to try to hit, which is great. Okay. The less good world is, well, it seems like everyone else is doing it, so we should too. And basically, if you don't have a standard to meet, then one of two things is going to happen. You're going to waste a bunch of time, or you're just never going to be happy. You're going to be like, well, shouldn't it be better than this? Right. So I think set an expectation, whatever it is, set it, figure out like what is reasonable, and maybe adjust over time if it turns out you undershot or overshot. But like, figure out like, what is my goal, and then do that. And that sounds so dumb and simple that maybe I shouldn't even have said it, but this seems like the number one failure mode that we've tended to see is folks who really just don't have a metric yet. Okay, getting more into like technical weeds, I think one of the other things that you're really going to find quickly is it is really easy to build a system that just kind of limps along. And, it'll work when there's not much pressure, and it'll work, as a demo, and that's it, right? And so if you do that, it's possible to build up essentially infinite technical debt in Web3, right? Because Web3 technology is very complex, because there's all kinds of security questions and all of this. Like, you can end up in a situation very rapidly where your whole system has like sort of pervasive problems. Sure, you need to get something, you need an MVP, but on the other hand, I think really keep an eye on the horizon and really understand, like, at some point, this technical debt isn't just like developer productivity anymore, as it might be in other industries. It's like direct risk to my end customer because I didn't have time to, do the key management right, or my bridging solution is kind of subpar, but it's kind of working well enough for now, right? Like, with security, and this is like a good thing and a bad thing, but like with computer security generally, what we tend to see is like a system is secure not when like it functions correctly, but when it doesn't fall to an attacker. And that second part is much harder, right? It's much harder to prove a negative, right? So care in sort of building from the beginning is ideal. Not always possible, but at least keeping a running tally of this is where my technical debt is, and these are the things that are most important to fix as soon as possible, because otherwise at some point you really do end up in a situation where your customers are directly at risk.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Riad, you know me. In my day job, I'm someone that deeply is involved in both a theoretical research and practical application. That's something that we really have in common. I'd like to hear from you where you see the intersection of academia and industry having the greatest impact on the evolution of Web3.
This is great. This is a great question. One of the really cool things about Web3 is, I'd say, just how deep its roots in academia and research are. And that's partially because a lot of folks who were in, or maybe still are in research like me, have ended up also working in Web3. And I think it's just partially because it's just really cool advanced technology, right? This is kind of a unique thing compared to a lot of other industries where there's a much brighter dividing line between what's happening in academia and what's happening in industry. One way to capitalize on that is to really think through, like, when we have an industry partnership, like, for example, at Carnegie Mellon, like, how do we enable, say, really fast iteration by the engineers at the company while we're still kind of plodding along in our research? And of course, we like to go fast, but like research just moves more slowly, right? And to me, getting that division correct, like figuring out, like, how do we capitalize as quickly as possible on research whose timeline is often unpredictable, is like a huge opportunity for jumping ahead because of the research that you've just managed to make use of. Okay, so I'd say one thing there is really, really thinking carefully about, like, where are the strengths coming from on each side of the line and making sure that we're capitalizing as much as possible. Okay, I think the other one is, unlike in a lot of other industries, because Web3 is, decentralized and permissionless, I can really go from a research idea to at least a product prototype very, 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 very quickly. And so what this means is that we just have more opportunity for iteration than in a lot of other industries. I think that's just like this sustaining advantage that we will continue to have for a long time, where sort of opportunity cost of trying out a new research idea in, the real world, quote unquote, is quite low compared to in a lot of other places. To me, these are the really, really exciting things about working at that intersection.
To me too. That's perfect. Where can our listeners learn more about Cubist and your work?
We're at cubist.dev. My academic work is at wahby.net. Ping us anytime. We're always happy to chat. We've got a lot of interesting things going on, whether it's securing keys or securing bridging. Actually, one thing that we didn't really touch on involves a new way of adding extra layers of security to cross-chain bridging. We'd love to apply that more widely. We call that Bascule. We had a blog post about it somewhat recently. Check out our blog. Ping us. I'm on Telegram at Quantum, KWANTAM. Yeah, hit me up anytime. I'm always happy to chat.
That's amazing. Okay, listeners, you heard that Riad just offered his mentorship, and I would totally take advantage of his brain power. Yeah. Riad, this has been an amazing conversation talking about secure key management infrastructure. You've shared so many insightful stories, and I'm really grateful that you're spending your time and your brain power on safely bringing blockchain and crypto to the mainstream. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been super, super fun.
Awesome. To our listeners and subscribers, thank you for your ears and for your feedback to my ubri@ripple.com email. If you have any questions about this episode or ideas for future episodes, please reach out. Until next time.